You are now recording.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, it is 1:30. I am Sarah Hadd. I'm the Vice Chair of the Land Use Review Board. I'd like to call the meeting to order and do a member roll call. Kirsten?
Kirsten Sultan,
Janet?
Janet Hurley, Chair.
Alex?
Alex Weinhagen, hello.
And Brooke.
Brooke Fingeldine, hello.
Introduction to explanation of pre-application process. Before I get into the explanation of the pre-application process, Brooke and Janet both have statements. Brooke, would you like to go first?
Thank you. My name is Brooke Fingeldine. I'm a member of the Land Use Review Board, and I am recusing myself from the Bennington County Regional Plan pre-application and application proceedings due to my professional obligations. So I wish you all luck, and if you would excuse me, I would bid you farewell.
Absolutely,
See you,
Brooke.
Brooke.
We will see you later. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Safe travels, everyone.
You too. Janet?
So before we begin today's review of the Bennington County Regional Plan, I would like to make the following disclosure on the record. From 2012 to 2022, I served as a commissioner representing first Manchester Village and then the town of Manchester on the Bennington County Regional Commission. From 2018 to 2022, I served as chair of the commission. In 2022, I resigned from the commission to take a position as assistant director and planning program manager for the BCRC. My work as BCRC commissioner and then as BCRC staff, including drafting language that was used in prior BCRC regional plans. My affiliation with the BCRC ended upon my appointment to the Land Use Review Board in January 2025. I do not have any ongoing personal, professional, or financial interest in the BCRC and had no part in drafting of the regional plan, in the drafting of this regional plan that is now being reviewed by the Land Use Review Board. I have never acted as counsel to the BCRC and retain no direct or indirect interest in the outcome of this matter, where I will be acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. I have consulted with the Land Use Review Board General Counsel as to my ethical obligations in this matter and have determined that my prior service or employment does not raise a conflict of interest, which would require my recusal under the Vermont Code of Ethics or the board's specific ethical standards at 10 VSA 6031. I believe I have good cause to proceed based on the speculative nature of any conflict or appearance of conflict. In an abundance of caution, I am making this disclosure on the record in sufficient detail so that the matter may be understood by the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. With that, if there are any questions, I will move into a brief explanation of what we're here to do today. So under Act 21 of the 2024 legislature, the Land Use Review Board is responsible for approving regional plans, including future land use maps developed by the state's 11 regional planning commissions. And by December 31st of this year, all RPCs must have adopted Act 1A1 compliant plans. So what this is sort of the first step in the process is the board reviews a 60-day pre-application review of plans, regional plans that have not yet been adopted. And it's really meant to be sort of an informal understanding of what's being proposed, a chance for us to provide feedback and ask questions. And so that is what we will endeavor to do today, as well as to provide an opportunity for not just the board, but our state agency partners and the public to comment. If you cannot make it today to this meeting or online, and if you wish to submit comments, you may do that by either participating in the meeting here today. We do have public comment at the end, or by submitting to act250.board@vermont.gov those comments. And I believe the comment period is open to June 8th, thereabouts. So any comments or questions on the process before we begin? And leave anything out? Anybody else wanna, okay. So with that, we'll turn it over to a presentation from BCRC, and thank you so much for coming, and might you introduce yourselves quickly as you present?
Sure, certainly. Thank you and welcome to the Bennington region. I am Bill Sullivan. I'm the director of the Bennington County Regional Commission. I'm joined by three planners from BCRC, Callie Fishburne, Samantha Page, and Nick Zayas. We're delighted that you're here in the region. We appreciate the opportunity to do the tour around some of the sites this morning. The current regional plan that we have in place was adopted by the BCRC in November of 2024, prior to full implementation of Act 181. Almost immediately, 2 months later, in January 2025, we began the process. Just led us to this date of the pre-application to the Land Use Review Board for a new regional plan. That process began with public outreach again in January 2025 and has continued through to our submission to the Land Use Review Board just a couple of weeks ago. And certainly this was an all hands on deck. The entire staff of BCRC has participated in the drafting and organization of this draft regional plan, but really the three people here in the room with me today, Samantha and Callie, have carried most of the water for the regional plan, both in terms of outreach, mapping, and drafting of the plan. So we are delighted to present that work to you today and look forward to your questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Callie, who's going to walk you through the public outreach, extensive public outreach processes that we have followed. Callie,
Do you want to join the teams and we can make you a presenter? All right, and I'll just take the moment to say there's a sign-in sheet for everybody that's here that's not forward to, as you have a chance. Should be able to share.
There you go.
That's on the state's computer, don't worry. Why it chose to do that in the middle of a hearing.
Meeting.
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. So we'll just start off again. I'm Callie Fishburne, as Bill said, and I'm just going to start off by talking briefly about the characteristics of the region and go through the public engagement that laid the foundation for this plan. So we're made up of 17 municipalities in the BCRC region. That's 14 towns and 3 incorporated villages. We make up about 5% of the state's population, and we serve all of the towns or municipalities in Bennington County except for Reedsboro, Searsburg, and Winhall. So I am going to go through some, as I said, the general public engagement that we worked on, which really laid the foundation for this plan. We really made an effort through this public engagement strategy to, do broad outreach more so and try and reach as many people as possible, more people than we had reached in any prior engagement through our regional plan, and come up with a variety of different ways to gather input. So next slide, please. So this is just a general timeline of our regional plan engagement. You can see this all took place in 2025, so last year. So the first part of the year was really when we were doing a lot of the planning commission meetings. This is when we were going out to the different planning commissions and talking about future land use maps and Act 181 in general and implications for municipalities. And we had a number of meetings that took place outside of that first 6-month period in 2025 as well. But I would say the bulk of the meetings took place during that first part of the year. And then we really launched our more public-facing engagement in the spring of 2025, which continued through the fall. And you can see some of the different methods that we did there, tabling at public events. We had some information and posters up at community centers, so that was mainly libraries. And we had a survey, of course, and we did a lot to try and get the word out about these opportunities. We have and continue to have a dedicated page on our website, which we update regularly with information about where we are in the process. We filmed a local TV announcement through Greater Northshire Access Television, which was fun. We were featured in an article in the Bennington Banner, and of course we did social media, listservs, flyers, and direct outreach to some municipal groups. So this is just some engagement by the numbers here. You can see we reached at our public events that we attended over 330 people, which I think was great. We had a little over 100 survey responses. We attended over 30 municipal meetings, a combination of planning and select board meetings. We did 2 focus groups with specific stakeholder groups. One was with new Americans and folks with limited English proficiency, and we did that in partnership with the Bennington County Multicultural Community Center, bit of a mouthful. And through that partnership as well, we were able to translate our outreach materials into Spanish and Dari, which are 2 of the prominent languages spoken by our new American community here in Bennington County. And we also did a focus group with youth in trade education through the Southwest Tech Center. And the towns that we did events in, we were in Arlington, Bennington, Manchester, North Bennington, Pownell, Rupert, and Stamford. And we had posters and idea posters that people could write and add to in 3 public libraries and at the Multicultural Community Center as well. So a little bit about municipal meetings, but of course, you'll hear much more about our future land use map later on in the presentation. But just the general goals of our municipal meetings, of which I said we did over 30, was to introduce Act 181 and the sections relevant to municipalities, introduce a draft of the future land use map by municipality, and have an initial conversation with municipal officials about that, and discuss the new tiered system of Act 250 jurisdiction and what that means for them. So just a couple of highlights of our engagement results and themes, which really formed a lot of the basis of our plan in addition to the statutory requirements. So at a number of our events and at the different libraries where we had displays up, we asked people to do dot voting, because that's what planners love to do, is ask people to do dot voting. And we asked people about their most important priorities were in the region. We based those off of the state planning goals. So they're basically rephrase versions of the state planning goals. And you can see by far that the highest priority people voted on was safe, high quality, and affordable housing for all Vermonters, followed closely by clean air and water, healthy forests, and abundant wildlife. So I would say that, at least in Bennington County, the public's priorities pretty closely align with the intent of what Act 181 was created to do. And then just some examples of some open-ended responses that we received in our survey. Our survey was pretty broad and asked a variety of topical questions, and there was a mix of multiple choice and open-ended. But these were some interesting open-ended responses or key themes that we pulled out of our open-ended responses, and we asked about the greatest strengths of the region and the greatest challenges. So as you can see, strengths, people responded that they feel like there's a strong sense of community. They appreciated community spaces and events, and that's something that's carried through into our regional plan, as I think you'll see later. People value the natural beauty of the region, its rural character, outdoor recreation, and the proximity to some larger regions like the Capital District of New York and major cities like New York City and Boston. So then some challenges of the region, and I think this isn't surprising given what I just showed with the dot voting results, is that one of the greatest challenges people expressed to us were housing affordability and availability, economic stagnation, general resistance to change, poverty, homelessness, access to essential services like healthcare, and other types of public services. And I think this is also consistent with a lot of the conversations that we had with people at the public events, and something that we really took in mind when developing our regional plan. And so now, with that brief overview of all the community engagement that we did, I'm going to hand it over to Sam, who is going to talk more in detail about the plan itself.
Yeah, so we really tried to take what we heard from the public during all of that extensive community engagement and think about it and synthesize it into a structure and an organizational format that would guide the plan and the policies that we put in the regional plan. So the organization of the regional plan really grew out of all of that community feedback, and we structured the plan into 5 thematic sections plus an introductory section. And within those thematic groupings, there are chapters that follow broadly the state's planning goals. But we really wanted to sort of bring topic areas together that aligned with the community's values and the issues that are most pressing to the people living and working in this area. As Bill mentioned, we updated our regional plan pretty recently, so a lot of the data was pretty recent, but we still wanted to make some substantive changes, not only to align with the requirements of Act 181, but to really make this a more user-friendly visual document that would be a resource, not only for our office, but also for the municipalities we work with and anyone else interested in engaging with this material. So there's the thematic structure and a much more visual emphasis throughout the document. Our introduction, we really tried to shape as more of sort of a user guide to the plan, and it includes a regional profile, and it also calls out sort of the structural elements of the plan so that one can navigate it more easily. Our land use categories are now aligned with Act 181. Our housing methodology has been updated, refined since the 2024 plan, and really informed even stronger policies to try to support housing growth in the region. We really tried to leave the emphasis on community input throughout the plan. So this illustration of one of these boxes of what did we learn from the community, we included at the start of each chapter to really root the introduction to the material in the comments that we heard from the public. Each chapter also ends with a list of goals, policies, and action items so that each content area can result in specific next steps that the Regional Planning Commission and municipalities and community members can take to start putting these ideas into effect. And then we also wanted to make sure that we addressed environmental justice issues throughout the plan. So the symbol that you see on this slide is our colleague Scott's illustration of environmental justice, sort of tree roots, as well as the scales of justice together. And that symbol is throughout the plan, where there are descriptions, qualitative descriptions of environmental justice considerations, and then it also shows up again in the goals and actions list and the implementation matrix to show where we tried to develop policies and actions that would work to address any environmental benefit or burden issues or sort of inequities in the region. And then a couple of other sort of chapter updates where we tried to expand our discussion of municipal governance.
For those of you that are joining online, I think we've lost the connection to the room. So we're just going to stand by for a few minutes while they try and reconnect. Hi, Marcella. I know you're joining us partway through the meeting. We just lost connection with the folks who are down in Bennington running the in-person public meeting portion of this meeting. And we're just going to stand by for a few minutes while they try and reconnect.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Sorry to jump in late.
No, not at all. Hi, Annette. I just wanted to let you know that we commenced the meeting just at 1:30 today, but we just lost internet connection with the folks who are in the meeting in Bennington right now. So we're just sitting tight, waiting for them to reconnect, and I know they're working on it now. Thanks, everybody, for your patience.
My apologies. We have lost Wi-Fi here and we're working off of a phone hotspot with only 2 bars. So if we drop again, it's just internet connectivity issues, but please continue.
I'll just say quickly, because now we're maybe a little behind time. One thing I neglected to mention is that when we were developing drafts of the plan, we had a regional plan advisory committee working with us, made up of membership from individuals from different municipalities, including someone who's in the room today from the town of Sandgate, and we benefited greatly from their input on the drafts, and they really pushed us to make sure that the document was usable and helpful for the municipalities in our region as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
That was Kelly.
Yes, that was Callie. I'm sorry.
Okay, and this is Samantha Page speaking again. Okay, so this is just an overview of the implementation matrix that we included at the end of the plan, which organizes all of the goals, policies, and actions from each chapter in one place so that one could just look sort of in this guiding document at the end of the full plan. And we tried to really tie items to specific program areas within the organization and really make them action oriented so that we can get to work really pushing these goals forward. When we were updating our future land use map, just want to kind of share where we came from before we started working on the Act 181 future land use categories. So in previous plans, the BCRC has had 4 future land use categories plus hamlet points. So there was a lot of shifting in terms of incorporating the 10 categories that are described in Act 181, but we still think that there is a lot of overlap and sort of direct translation between how we were describing future land uses in the region before and how they're described using the newer categories. So as you can see, a significant part of the eastern part of our region is in rural conservation, and that is land in the Green Mountain National Forest. And then you can also kind of follow the valley, which we traveled today on the site visit earlier this morning. You can see kind of that diagonal line running from sort of the Bennington area up to the northeastern part of the county is where 7 and 7A run and cut through a lot of the village centers and village areas that we'll talk about a little bit more next. So again, just another sort of way of seeing the future land use areas in our region. Rural conservation is really a significant part of the Bennington region with 60% of the future land use area. But there's a lot of agricultural areas in the region as well. And then sort of a small but mighty share of centers and growth areas that we're excited to share a little bit more about. So we have one downtown center in Bennington, which is proposed to be an expansion from an existing legacy downtown that's been in the Bennington area. We're proposing 12 village centers. 17 of those are part of the legacy designation program, and the 5 proposed village centers are in Woodford, Old Bennington, Sandgate, Land Grove, and 1 additional center in Dorset, which has 2.
Just for the record, Sam, you said 12. I think you meant 20.
Oh, sorry, I meant 22.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry. 22 and 5 additional from the current 17 legacy centers. Thanks. We're proposing 2 planned growth areas, 1 in Bennington and 1 in the town of Manchester. Bennington has a legacy growth center that is really the much of the boundary for the planned growth area follows closely, and then Manchester has legacy neighborhood development area. And the planned growth area follows that in parts, but is an expansion on that NDA. And then we're proposing 14 village areas throughout the region. You'll notice that many of those village areas are spread across multiple polygons. And that's really a reflection of the flood hazard and river corridor constraints in and around those areas. So I think culturally they feel contiguous with the centers that they're surrounding, but for the purposes of mapping those areas, there's often a break where there are flood hazard constraints. And then this is sort of just another look at all of the proposed centers and planned growth in village areas in the region. You'll note that we also have marked where there are proposed Tier 1B areas. So 5 of the municipalities in our region have opted into the Tier 1B process. But this just kind of, it gives an overview of the variety of size and scale of these centers throughout the region. Some of our municipalities already have 2 or 3 centers in them, such as Pownell, which has 3 centers, and Shaftesbury has 2 centers. There's a real variety in sort of the civic, commercial, and residential characters of these centers, but they all are rooted in some sort of either combination of civic and commercial institutions. So even some of our smaller centers, such as Woodford, which is a new proposed center, has an elementary school and their town office and some residential area in their center. Bennington's downtown is by far the biggest proposed center in our region, and we were able to stop there on the site visit this morning to talk about how the proposed expansion reflects an extension to include more civic infrastructure, as well as bike and pedestrian infrastructure, commercial spaces, open spaces to the north of Bennington's current designated downtown boundary. So we're happy to answer more specific questions about any of these boundaries during the question and answer period. And now Nick will share a little bit more about the Tier 1B municipalities in particular.
So I'm Nick Zeiss. I'm going to talk about Tier 1B in our 5 Tier 1B all-star towns. I'm very excited to see these towns seeking out Tier 1B status. Those are Arlington, Bennington, Manchester, North Bennington, and Shaftesbury, and we will discuss each of those in sequence. Here in Arlington, we have a Tier 1B area proposed for both Arlington and East Arlington village centers and associated village areas. This area is absolutely ripe with historic everything, that including Thomas Chittenden's house, the Remember Baker Mill, and where we sit today in a National Register Historic District that anchors Arlington Village Center. Both centers are constrained by floodplains and river corridors, but have the benefit of having a town-owned utility throughout the coverage area. And we did include all of the eligible areas. The town was very excited to include all of the eligible areas in a way that can knit both Arlington and East Arlington together. Moving on to Bennington, the geographically largest proposed Tier 1B area, anchored by its legacy downtown that we saw this morning. The carve-outs being wetlands of greater than 10 acres. So there were some slight reductions in those places from the previous growth area, and the extensions were typically to the northeast into the southwest, but the intent was to cover areas with public utilities that are primed for growth and have not faded into suburban and rural development. These areas are bound by water and wastewater, are bound by rivers, river corridors, and floodplains. And Bennington has the benefit of public water and wastewater throughout the town, spreading well beyond the boundaries of this planned growth area, including, but many of those areas are areas that are out in the town's rural conservation district that were extended to address systematic environmental hazards like namely PFAS. So that is why it's found where it is. Moving on to Manchester. Manchester saw a substantial expansion to its planned growth area from its previous neighborhood development area, and with it, the proposed Tier 1B designated area. It also has many National Register historic buildings. It does have floodplains and river corridors, as well as extensive wetlands that form many of the edges of this planned growth area. It does have town water and wastewater route or planned extensions to select properties that are included in it, and in those areas that are not served currently, they do have suitable soils for those sites. All eligible areas in Manchester town were included, acknowledging that Manchester Village is independent and did not opt in. North Bennington is a really interesting and potentially the most interesting of these Tier 1B municipalities. This planning commission and trustees took a very forward-looking approach to both village area mapping, designated center mapping, and with it, the Tier 1B area. This represented a substantial new proposal to pair with an enormous amount of work that North Bennington has put in recent years to prime itself for a future that involves housing growth, that involves bringing vitality, particularly around the edges of its existing college campus, and ensuring that development potential is available should the college need to engage in real estate development to ensure its long-term sustainability. So this village area was largely expanded to cover most of the village. Almost the entire village is served by water and sewer. It maintains a village-owned public utility whose lines extend into Shaftesbury, which I will address on the next slide. But North Bennington as a National Register Historic District, actually 2 National Register Historic Districts in the tiny village, as well as a number of historic buildings. It is truly one of the most ancient places in Vermont in a way that has an enormous amount of life and shows what a town with a long history can do to think about its future. So in Shaftesbury has the unique situation of its own center, South Shaftesbury Center, along with associated village area, as well as a village area associated with the village of North Bennington. The town opted into Tier 1B for both of these areas, but did not opt in for the historic civic center Shaftesbury village area or village center that is to the north that we drove through this morning during the site visit. That is bound by conserved farmland in pretty much all directions, including having an active orchard in its village center, which is a kind of unique quality to it. But so certainly something that deterred them opting into Tier 1B there. It does not have utilities in that center. But down in South Shaftesbury Village Center, we do have a Shaftesbury-owned public utility that serves South Shaftesbury Center and associated village area. But the village area associated with the village of North Bennington is associated with North Bennington's water utility. So intermunicipal coordination on development in this area is going to be paramount, but we're very excited that these conversations have encouraged the towns to think about their future together. So shifting gears into the housing targets. I'll go through the housing target methodology and then we'll share the results of these. Our methodology started with finalizing the FLU map, and then we used both the 2030 lower and the upper targets to consider both of the options for 2030, and then we assigned a fraction of the future land use areas based on the substantial majority requirement. to such that 75% of the target was assigned to the 4 areas associated with the substantial majority requirement. And then we assigned the fraction of the total area of village centers that existed in a municipality would be associated with the same percentage of the target assigned to that future land use area. And then the target is the sum of all of the areas in a town. You can see the weighting to the right, and the plan has a lot more detail about how we came to that weighting. But I'll look at an example from here in the town of Arlington of how much of the target is associated with each type of FLU area, and that total up to its 99 homes by 2030 and 204 homes to 401 homes by 2050 target. And then moving into the breakdown of the methodology using 2050 targets. We use 2050 lowers for this targeting because we see a substantial wastewater constraint between now and 2050, including a wastewater constraint grounded in municipal fiscal capacity to expand the wastewater sites. Arlington is a great example, which does not have wastewater, which has been taken 5 bites of the apple attempting to think about wastewater. But we know that wastewater is going to be a meaningful constraint on our municipality region. We also believe that the region saw a disproportionate relative to the state run up in COVID-related demand that was in part driving some of those the amounts that they go into the uppers. So we see that effect waning over the next 25 years, certainly, and that the overall housing shares within the state are likely to shift in a way that does not disproportionately affect Bennington County. Overall, we have targets as shown on this slide, but targets that generally align with known infrastructure availability and the potential capacity of the town. We understand that these targets will have differing levels of viability or reachability in each town, particularly given the infrastructure constraints. But we do believe that based on the methodology supplied, that they largely relate to the fractions of development potential in each town, with by far the most potential housing being proposed in Bennington and Manchester to a lesser extent, about half of the overall target being in Bennington, and more than half in those 2 largest towns combined, with very small fractions in some of the smallest towns that have the least fiscal capacity and the least infrastructure. So that is it. We welcome any questions. A wonderful photo from here in Arlington that you may have seen earlier.
So anything else on your presentation before we do take you up on the offer of questions? The next segment that we have, which was say for 2:30, so we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, was questions from the board members and observations from the site visits. So by way of introduction, the board conducted site visits this morning throughout the area, and we observed several different stops. We went from Dorset to Manchester, down 7A, through Arlington and Shaftesbury, through the various different areas of Bennington, stopped in Bennington, and then came back up Route 7 to Manchester. And what we stated at the time was if anybody wished to share any questions or observations or comments, please do so in this forum so we could preserve the questions on our records and respond to them. So just sort of framing up the board questions and comments first, and also comments that might wish to be made about those site visits. So since we're running a little bit ahead of schedule before we get into the board comments for the BCRC staff, you were the only ones really joining us. at those site visits? Is there anything from the site visits that you wish to state?
Yeah, I think just to recap some of the Manchester site visit in particular, where we had a couple of town staff join us briefly, that Gordon Black spoke to some of the development opportunities in the planned growth area in particular, where the town is partnering with the 802 Homes program for potential developments on the northeastern end of the planned growth area around where their town offices are. And then he also called out in particular the development potential of the property in the southeastern part of the planned growth area around what's known as the Airport Road property. So we had a little bit of discussion there about that property. Nick had mentioned that that was a site that there was a lot of community discussion and discussion between us at BCRC and the town about the planning intent of that area and what future land use category was the best designation, or not the best categorization for that area. And so we ultimately have mapped it as a planned growth area in light of the planned utility provision, pedestrian and bike infrastructure planning, and housing development that the town and a private developer are both sort of seeking to collaborate on in that area. So I think that's some helpful context for that particular piece of mapping. I think that the Dorset Drive was also some helpful context, hopefully for you all, with the proposed center there. So as I mentioned, there are 5 new village centers proposed in our mapping relative to what the legacy centers have been. And Dorset is the biggest of that grouping, and the decision to propose a new village center in South Dorset is a reflection of the work that the town has done on the Raptor Lane property, where they've built a new town office. They have extensive trail networks, and there are plans for significant housing development in that area. So again, the town's done a lot of planning work and has continued to engage with their community on the best use of that site, and really sees a future for it as a really vibrant hub in Dorset. Do you want to share anything else about the Bennington?
No, I think there.
And just for the record, Nick speaking.
Oh, yeah, Nick speaking. Short of the idea that Bennington's downtown was extended to reach what is seen culturally as its natural border at the Bloomsic, to capture some large institutional users, which can fit uneasily within this framework as within the downtown as opposed to within another category, knowing that civic institutions, including large civic institutions like state office buildings, like state properties such as the Vermont Veterans Home and the Mount Anthony High School coming into the downtown, certainly acknowledge that these large civic institutions that which employ many people and draw a number of trips every day are absolutely the kinds of institutions that, if they were in a town that is not Bennington and were close to the center, we would certainly want to attempt to include it, or would use it as an anchor to build a village center around, or understanding that a village center is likely to be around given the amount of use that these properties are getting. So that was certainly an insight from the Bennington site visit to the edge of the downtown, an area that was moved from the planned growth area.
I'll just add, this is Samantha speaking, one more thing. Nick mentioned the kind of cross-border village area between North Bennington and Shaftesbury, which we were able to see on the site visit. And then one other sort of similar area that I pointed out from afar on the site visit was a proposed village area that's in the town of Sunderland, but is associated with the East Arlington Village Center. In that case, Sunderland did not opt into Tier 1B, so it's proposed as a village area, but the Tier 1B proposed boundary ends at the Arlington town border. So just a couple of instances in the region where the municipal boundaries don't necessarily reflect the feeling of sort of the growth center or associated village area, but slightly different approaches in how those municipalities are prepared to plan or develop in those areas, largely based on just municipal capacity.
All right, well, thank you. I think what we'd like to do is now return to questions from board members. Kirsten, would you like to start?
Sure. Just jot my own name on there. Taking notes for us all.
Kirsten has to do the minutes after.
Yes.
Yes.
So, just interested in hearing, you talked a little bit about the Bennington airport or Manchester airport area. I guess I was interested in hearing a little bit more about that and also about the inclusion of the golf course in the Bennington expanded PGA area in terms of like including those existing developed somewhat large parcels in planned growth category. And I don't, if you could just talk about sort of maybe a little bit more of the rationale for why those were included. And then I wanted to just touch on some of the flood hazard area mapping, how that's displayed also in PGA. So whatever you would like to start with.
I can start with Manchester Airport.
And this is Nick.
This is Nick. The Manchester Airport was we waffled between whether it should be a transition area or a planned growth area. But the planned growth area extends to close to, or would have extended to close to the area anyway, had the area not been included in to reflect both existing developed areas, existing civic anchor institutions like post offices at East Manchester Road, and as well as existing utilities. We tried to, where possible, map to the edges of existing utilities, and Manchester's main utility sites for both water and wastewater are on the south end of town, not too far from the airport itself, limiting the amount of investment that it will take to extend line to the property. The property does already have water service, just not enough. But the not enough was not subject to the analysis of this process, as we've all known. But because there were active development discussions and projects in process as the mapping was ongoing, this was the decision to include it in this in the planned growth area, and thus the potential Tier 1B area were to encourage these sites to be used in ways that are encouraged by the planned growth area, namely for housing to address the public's identified largest issue. So in the interest of providing for more room for growth to address this large issue, we were as generous as we felt we could with properties like this. Likewise, with Bennington Country Club, providing optionality to property owners for the reuse of a site before a site's existing use viability is exhausted is something that we in the Bennington region feel is very important, in part because we have sites such as the Southern Vermont College campus, which were outside the planned growth area and then saw their existing use decline and saw the college close a number of years ago. And providing optionality on these large parcels whose current use future is not guaranteed, but brought that treatment both of the country club, both in line with the the Manchester Airport as well as the Bennington College campus. They got a somewhat similar treatment of optionality for large parcels that are on the edges of the planned growth area.
Thanks,
I'm
Nick.
sorry, can I just add, this is Bill Colvin. With regard to the Mount Anthony Country Club, prior to, the property was in the relatively recent past in transition from a prior owner. At that time, there was in fact a plan for housing development on the site. There was a different owner that ultimately acquired the site, but that discussion is somewhat less hypothetical than it might be.
Kirsten, I'm gonna let you go first.
Okay, so I just wanted to make a note that during the site visit, we did drive by the country club and observed a circular shaped, I think, former residence that it was made known there was some redevelopment in process.
Below it.
That was just a maintenance building for the existing golf course, but the maintenance building is being designed or was designed in line with residential design standards in place in the town of Bennington that cover that area.
Okay.
So yeah, the area is currently subject to existing Bennington design review or design criteria
And
and
that's
form-based zoning.
Jan.
And just to clarify for the record, this is Janet Hurley. The Dorset property that we went to that primarily comprise, is the whole center or is just most of the center?
There are a couple of other properties
There
that
are.
are in that.
That's right. It goes up to the quarry and the quarry
Yeah.
parking.
It includes the factory at the bottom of the hill
Yeah,
that gives it a bit of
okay.
a mixed use component.
And then, but most of that area is owned by the town. It's about 300 acres. And similarly, in Manchester, we learned it's not an airport, it's an airstrip, it's a grass strip, it's privately owned. But adjacent to that, what's being called the airport road property is owned by the town and it's about 60 acres. And so the town is engaged with communicating with potential developers to do housing development on that site. So I just, like, the reason that it's viable is because of this large town ownership and partnership.
And I'll just, this is Samantha Page. I'll clarify that the Dorset Center, it doesn't include the entire Raptor Lane property because
Okay.
the sort of upper reaches of the property have really steep slope and other natural constraints on development. So the mapping of the center is really primarily focused on the Raptor Lane parcel that is developable for housing.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Alex. I wanted to just make that point after looking at the maps and after our visit that it looks like the town owns a parcel of about 550 acres and maybe 200 or 250 of it are in the proposed center in the lower portion, not that upper portion that's mapped in a different future land use area category.
All right, Kirsten, you had other questions. I'm gonna let you finish the thought
Okay,
writing
so-
now, but
Just a kind of clarification about, so planned growth area, that category of future land use is to omit flood hazard area river corridor. And the way the mapping works, you've got the categories to apply and then you've also got that kind of as it's sort of an overlay. But the underlay land use category in some spots, for instance, some of the PGA expansion in Bennington, some of the PGA expansion in Manchester it's mapped as PGA, but it also that PGA area includes some flood hazard area. And so I just didn't know if there was any intention to, depict more clearly that the PGA does not include the flood hazard area, or perhaps map it as an overlay. I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Some PGA can include areas of infill. So if it meets the definition of infill and it's flood hazard, they can
Yes,
be in
if it's infill.
This is Samantha. I think we were mapping with the understanding that or the sort of interpretation, I guess, that if there were flood hazard regulations in place in the municipalities that could sort of identify or guide infill development, that could be that was acceptable within that category. But I agree that we could identify that area better with overlays and make that more clear.
And I think the way the statute reads for PGA, it doesn't matter if you have municipal bylaws, you still can't have those areas within PGA.
Except for infill
I
areas, yeah.
think so.
Okay,
except
that's
for infill.
confusing.
So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of flag it a little bit to take another, like, to take a look at
Yeah.
before you come back with final plan submittal, I guess is all.
What
Yeah,
other
that's-
questions do you have? Oh, that's
That's
it?
it.
That's it?
Yeah.
All right, Jan or Alex, who would like to go next?
Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
So we drove through Sunderland and the new town center that is proposed in or village center, sorry, proposed for Sunderland. I'm just wondering if you can give an update on the planning status, the town's status, planning status for that area.
They have a current town, this is Nick. They have a current town plan. That plan is expiring, but their hearing is scheduled. We expect that that center will be, or that the town will have a confirmed plan in the next couple of months. It's about the timing of both the BCRC meeting and the town's hearing. But the plan is complete. The hearing has been warned, and we are excited to see that hearing in the next month, as well as the adoption proceedings thereafter.
That's partially, but also, I thought that they were looking at, that area in terms of opportunities for grants to look at particular economic development planning in that area. Are they still doing that?
The planning commission really focused on figuring out what their future was as part of the planning process in the last year. The town has stepped back as its administrative capacity has shifted in the last year from seeking out very specific high economic development related strategies, but there are potential town properties, I should say, in the center, the church site that has been discussed for a number of years. But the center was slightly expanded from its previous iteration, acknowledging that the center is a primarily commercial center rather than a residential center. But yeah, they did step back from direct economic development related efforts a bit to focus on the other pressing concerns.
And this is Bill, if I could just add on, I do think that some of the institutional capacity in Sunderland has been shifted away due to the vote to close the elementary school. So I think a lot of time, attention, municipal meetings and capacity have been shifted in that direction.
I see. The Peru village area that is depicted, I'm wondering about status of planning for the areas there that are currently zoned RR2 and RR5. This is Janet again with a question.
So the Peru Village area is one that we really wrestled over, but we felt a need to map where we could, where there was relatively, given the Out Mountain zoning, planned capacity growth. And that RR2 focused area is among the densest zones in Peru and Land Grove.
Yeah.
But because that maps the only area or the largest singular area that is not existing conserved that could have see development potential in an area that is extraordinarily housing constrained, we felt a need to map as much as we viably could, acknowledging that 2-acre zoning is a lot for a village, but is relatively dense for that town. And is closer to being on par with some of the sites in Bromley Village to the west in the RBR. But I will note that yes, that is the only village area that doesn't have infrastructure and was based purely on soils and really was based more on need and geology than the rest of the components. It is a relatively dense area, densely planned area, given the constraints.
Yeah.
But
But do they, in their town plan or in any other planning documents, discuss changing that RR5 that is included in the village area? Okay,
actually,
Yeah, I don't know if it's reflected in their
okay,
plan, but, Miss Samantha. But I know they had some sort of speculative interest in housing development in that
Okay.
area.
Okay.
But we can confirm the plan.
okay, thanks. So now back down to Dorset. There are some areas mapped as village area. And this is in the Dorset Village. The Legacy Village, not the East Dorset, Legacy, but the other. That extend past the legacy areas that still have rural zoning. And the town plan future land use doesn't necessarily show any changes there in terms of wanting to see growth. So just wondering what the town's current plans are if they're not reflected in that future land use map in the town plan.
Yeah, this is Samantha. I think our expansions of the village area around Dorset Village was largely based on the water service availability and really trying to reflect where there's capacity for additional growth. I think the town has expressed just sort of general interest in continuing to revise zoning to sort of match capacity where they have it, but yeah, if it's not expressly, it might not be expressly called out in their plan at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the Raptor Lane stuff isn't in the town plan either. And I'm wondering, I know they've done tons of work. When are they gonna incorporate it into their plan?
Well,
well,
their town plan is, it's coming up for,
It is?
yeah,
Okay,
in a couple of, so
okay,
this is Samantha, I imagine that they'll be doing an update in the next year or two.
okay.
Yeah, it's sort of broad. I think it's like kind of generally discussed that there are housing concerns, but yeah, they've done an extensive amount of work outside of that specific document, and they have a new market study as of this week that really goes into a lot of research on the conditions of the housing market in Dorset, and then specifically talks about different scenarios for that site. So there are a lot of planning documents about that site in particular, just not well described in the plan.
Yeah,
But they've also done, they did some rezoning on that, in that area in particular in the last year with a bylaw amendment to kind of enable more of the sort of mixed use and multifamily housing that they have talked about potentially seeing on that site. So they're sort of, maybe approaching it in sort of a different order than the typical best practice, but they're still, I think that the planning intent is very much there.
okay, this is Janet, coming down to Arlington. So over here on 313, south of the rec park, there's on one side of the road, the north side of the road is village area. Or wait, which,
yeah, the north side.
the north side, and then on the south, it's rural general. I'm just wondering why it's different on both sides of the road there.
Absolutely. This is Nick. That is rubber core, pure and simple. That polygon of rural general, but for the river corridor constraint would be in village area if it could be. But that area is an area that is and should see less development. It is an area that has dramatically greater flood risk than the north side of the road. But the village area on the north side of the road, or centered on the north side of the road, reflects more or less the full extent of the Arlington water system, that in an area that was developed primarily around a water system. So an ancient utility, a neighborhood developed around an ancient utility, but some of that ancient utilities buildings are very, very floodable.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Janet's still now going into Shaftesbury. And I noticed the Shaftesbury Village Center, not the historic one, but the main South Shaftesbury. It looks very much developed. And so I imagine that that's why Shaftesbury wants that village area associated with North Bennington, because it looks like they don't really have much room for growth in that South Shaftesbury Center, even though it's relatively large. Is that true? Is there gonna be room for growth in that center?
Oh, yeah. So this is Nick again. That mapping reflects a town desire to see infill development in that area, even though those parcels are pretty much built out, in part through the relative intensity of zoning that they have, particularly along the parcels of fronting Route 7A. So the town is a wastewater constraint away from some really awesome infill development in that village area, but has engaged in substantial planning for wastewater. They received a village wastewater loan from the state to do that, and struggled to find sites. But should that wastewater constraint be lifted, either through a connection to the town Bennington wastewater system or distributed sites further west, that the idea was there's a general agreement politically of this is our center, this is a place for growth, and incremental development is desirable here if we can unlock that wastewater constraint to put some ADUs in backyards, some replacement of single family homes at the end of their useful life with multi-family homes, particularly fourplexes or things like that. And some of that is reflected in town zoning right now, despite the wastewater constraint.
And I'll also add, this is Callie, that, the town is very interested in exploring housing. They have, they just recently moved their town office from Cole Hall, which is the former church, I believe, to former Shaftesbury Medical Dental Office right off of 7A, and they're actively looking for reuse options for Cole Hall, as well as a piece of property that I believe is adjacent to Cole Hall that they purchased. And I know there's been interest in doing senior housing there. They've talked to some housing development organizations in the region about it. Again, I think the infrastructure constraints that Nick talked about are very real, but I think there's a lot of there's very strong support among the town, and they are actually in terms of their planning documents, we're just started plan update with them literally 2 weeks ago. We just kicked that off with them, and so I think we'll be having some of that discussion, and that will be reflected in their next plan, which should be early next year.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is Bill. There's also a relatively significant undeveloped piece adjacent to the relatively densely developed for Shaftesbury Holiday Drive and Sycamore Lane parcel. There's a pretty significant undeveloped piece in that area.
Now into North Bennington, and maybe I'm going to get the same answer that we got for here from Nick, but that there's on one side of the road is rural general sorry, I lost my connection, so I can't look at my map. But, yeah, North Bennington, but one it's right by the hangar factory, and I was asking about it on the bus. That one side is mapped as
Yeah, rural general.
rural general and village area.
yeah, okay.
Um,
And
yeah,
is it the same thing? Is it
yeah,
the
this is
river?
This is exactly it.
Okay.
Existing buildings that are in that river corridor were kicked from village area into rural general because I don't see them being conserved anytime soon. They're physical existing buildings that have been there for what feels like eons and they're expected to be occupied for the foreseeable future.
Okay. And then also in North Bennington, it's interesting to me that really half of the campus of Bennington College is in North Bennington and another half is in the southern kind of southeastern half is in the town of Bennington. And it even cuts through like some of the dormitories, the town line or the municipal boundary. And on one side, it's mapped village area, and on the other, it's mapped rural general. So in the town, it's mapped rural general. And I just wonder why? Why not map the entire campus as village area if indeed the campus, if the college is interested in, you know, as you said in your presentation, looking for opportunities in case they need money to to offload some you know, real estate, perhaps for housing development, because perhaps they will need to house students in it even, and or faculty or staff.
And this is again, they've engaged in a lot of adaptive reuse along that corridor that we drove down.
Yeah.
It's a very realistic idea, but there is a degree of the village exists as a standalone entity, and it was mapped as such. The town of Bennington, in an effort to avoid linearity along 67 Northside Drive, has not planned for additional capacity in that area. And the slopes are also a little bit higher on the southeastern portion in the town than the northern portion. And because those areas are distant from and are also getting to the far side of being distant from North Bennington Center, one thing that a planner could be afraid of would be development on the edge in Bennington disconnected from the center in North Bennington for whatever reason, that in a way that then leads to a more sprawl style development pattern as opposed to a development pattern that is fully tied in with the village. This screams, maybe they should do a master plan that includes both towns, the town and the village, but certainly the development intent of these two places and the fear of leapfrog development there was a very real one for us.
Okay, that's understandable, thanks. And still, Janet, let's go down to Pownell, even though Linda wasn't able to take us down to Pownell today on her bus. So the North Pownell Village area on the west side of the river. And the same thing for the Pownell Village area on the west side of the river. Can you talk about how you see those as connected to the center?
Yeah, this is Samantha. I think again, they do feel like contiguous sort of neighborhoods. But again, there's a river corridor mapped there, and Pownell doesn't have river corridor regulations in place locally, so just wasn't it didn't seem like in line with the mapping guidance to include those as sort of contiguous village areas. But there are like fairly dense residential neighborhoods on the west side of the river in both North Pownell and the Pownell Village area, Pownell Village area. Excuse me. And there's wastewater service that extends across the river in both of those cases. So I think we had probably even originally mapped it as contiguous until we sort of revised back based on the river corridor.
So Alex is highlighting here something, this is the How,
Share your screen.
yeah, maybe, can you share?
I'm not connected to Teams.
Oh, that's
so-
right, you're not.
Okay, just describe.
The north.
So there's a little area, yeah, come see this.
Hold on, tell me
Yes.
where and I'll get us connected.
Yeah.
Right here.
Yeah, yeah, that's,
The recording.
I'll note that that's also the river corridor treatment that we saw in North
Okay.
Bennington and Arlington.
Okay,
Um,
so that's one explanation, but and I understand what you're saying. But is there good pedestrian connection? And if not,
Mm.
is there plans for enhancing it in both of those villages and to those village areas on the other side of the river?
Yeah, that's honestly a really good question. Because these areas are on the other side of the river, they do struggle with pedestrian connections. And particularly the northern one will struggle with pedestrian connections even more with issues with the bridges. But given that particularly the northern of the two does not see a ton of traffic, it's not connected to anything, there is not a means for through traffic. It could be seen as a lower traffic pedestrian corridor in the same way neighborhoods elsewhere are, even though, yes, there's an enormous area behind it, but that area is recreation preserve, town forest, and things like that. The southern one does see a bit of through traffic, but is primarily mapped on utility, acknowledging that crossing that bridge maybe less than ideal. We do have conceptual projects mapped in the area to connect these, but the roads are gravel, so the idea of adding pedestrian infrastructure in there does get tricky. The idea of a complete street that could have wider shoulders to facilitate this access was something that we considered and would be the kind of pedestrian treatment that may be appropriate to support a neighborhood like this that is on wastewater really under, but would ARB transfer probably want to water out to a good place. But if that these areas on the other side of the river do feel a bit
Okay, thanks. And I have one more question. For your housing targets, it looks like you have a huge of ADUs. And I think 20% of all of your units are proposed to be ADUs, and in some places there are more ADUs than single unit structures that are proposed, that are targeted. And I'm just wondering, what's the plan for making that happen?
this is we in a place where septic soils and wastewater capacity are rare, we want to use every inch of those. If you see housing developments that make use of every inch of these soils, we do place a lot of weight, given the only 3-ish wastewater systems in the region, weighting heavily on ADUs, weighting heavily on, and particularly in the rural general and some of these outlying areas, is one of the ways we see development naturally happening. It is also a style of development that has broad acceptance in the region and has seen substantial historic style development, particularly in rural areas, of adding intergenerational living. We see a strong need for those small units, and given the increasing viability of manufactured and otherwise pre-built or off-site construction could be a substantial means of reaching the target, versus the alternative potential of a non-ADU single family unit, acknowledging the housing studies in the region say single bedroom units are in particular demand and are in particular need. So of the archetypes, this is the infill archetype in a way that does not lean heavily on a sprawl style,
Yeah,
single family reliant process.
yeah, I just think you're gonna have to head the ADU task force for the region.
I feel like I'm happy to take up that.
Yeah. Maybe, don't worry about it, it'll happen because it's on.
As a person who's hoping to build an ADU in the next couple of years, I'm hoping to be part of that myself.
Yeah.
But it certainly is a story that many of those who are younger are looking to build ADUs as part of intergenerational efforts. So, but I appreciate the comments on that.
And this is Bill. I mean, it's a very limited sample size, but we have partnered with the Bank of Bennington utilizing the so-called 10% for Vermont money with the to incent housing development through the provision of low interest, significantly below interest market loans using the treasurer's money and the Bank of Bennington money. There's $2.5 million. That money was fully subscribed in less than a month, and some of that demand is in fact for ADU development. So,
And, yeah, I mean,
we're trying to be creative.
Bennington, 200 ADUs and 340 single units, right?
Yes.
So,
And this is again, one of the reasons we felt comfortable with Bennington in particular is that Bennington does not have a COMAC compliant bylaw yet. They're working on that this year. That will see a substantial amount of zone capacity come online just from bringing the bylaw into COMAC compliance. Not that it is not technically on the books right now, but easing the constraints to make that development happen, unlocking and removing important barriers to infill development, namely lot size escalators that exist in Bennington that do not typically exist, that have more or less wholesale blocked this style of development, lead us to feel very comfortable with the target in Bennington, knowing those development constraints are falling away.
I'm sorry, I said that backwards. It's 340 ADUs, 200 single units in Bennington.
And this is Sarah. I just want to recognize that we are starting to sort of get hands raised from the public. We do have a time on our agenda that we will get to those, but we want to get through board questions first.
And I'm pitched, so
All right.
move to Alex.
Would you
Okay.
like to go next? or would you-
This is Alex. The implementation matrix section of the plan lists all the policy and action items from the various chapters and indicates which ones are related to environmental justice and what the primary regional commission's program areas. Have you thought about adding any additional information or columns as to like priority level or resources necessary, fiscal or otherwise, or time horizon?
I can speak to that. This is Samantha. Our plan, we had an uncountable number of columns, and I think this was our effort to really simplify and focus on just the specific tasks at hand. I think we've found also through some municipal plan updates that trying to prioritize felt like a whole additional planning effort unto itself. I understand that priorities are a big part of the outcome of the plan, but in this case, we decided we just wanted to really focus on sort of the simplest possible path forward and try to consolidate through fewer pieces of information.
So follow up on that. Again. Implementation matrix. And achieved, like,
And the not with the plan. A lot. So because of that. So we had remain continue to certification compliance with the energy program. But we really didn't do a lot of comparison with the previous implementation matrix because it felt like not a significant amount of time had passed adopting that about.
Yeah.
Folks in the room, I
I-
just,
So,
folks in the
You
room,
can just get
we're
a
not really,
notification that says this week.
we're not really able to hear you online. Backing up to Alex's last question. So just wanted you to be aware of that, and maybe we can take a minute to double check the connection.
Thanks, Rachel.
Sorry about that.
The guest Wi-Fi is working for me now. Like, I got back on, it's working. I've been back on. So I don't know if that or you're on your iPhone.
I think I'm on my iPhone. I think I'm just going to try to connect both laptops to the iPhone. I'm just doing not.
You might try the Wi-Fi again, is all I
Okay.
suggest, and it might work.
Rachel, can you hear us right now?
I can hear you, but you're a little bit garbled.
No.
And so I just wanted to take a minute to make sure that folks are online are able to hear you clearly when you're asking questions.
Do we have cable?
I wish this room were set up for that.
All right. Rachel, can you hear us now?
Can hear you much more clearly now, but I will just say that Alex, your last question, it was hard to hear it, and it was also hard to hear the response. So I don't know if you want to summarize
So let's
that
see.
quickly before moving on.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Yep, so this is Alex, and my first question was in regards to the implementation matrix in the plan and whether there was consideration of having additional columns that indicated perhaps priority level, time horizon, fiscal needs. Samantha spoke to that question, and then my follow-up question had to do with whether the commission had looked at the prior plan's implementation matrix and done any thinking or assessment about which of the policies and action items had been accomplished. And Samantha spoke to that one as well, reminding me that that plan was just completed in 2024, and the commission immediately jumped into updating it to fulfill the Act 181 obligations. So there wasn't much time to assess success of the 2024 plan.
This is Samantha, I'll also add that we did think very carefully about the language of our policies and action items. So we really tried to be intentional about what was within our purview or control, and as much as possible. I'm sure there might be, I'm sure there are instances where we were aspirational, but we really tried to focus our implementation steps on things that fall within our work as a regional commission and our role to support the municipalities that we serve. And so while there wasn't necessarily a sort of line by line review of the past implementation matrix, we were pretty considerate of how to align this implementation matrix with the sort of goals of usability and action-oriented planning that we talked about in the sort of how we conceive the structure of the plan.
And this is Bill. I would just further add that, you know, there is, it's not a prioritization, but there's special attention being paid to the environmental justice aspects of that implementation plan, as there are throughout the plan. And we felt that was both reflective of statute and what are the desires of this board based upon our read of other pre-application comments that have come through.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This is Alex again. And I did like the fact that in each of the chapters and sections, there was a section of how can BCRC help? And so part of me in looking at the implementation section was like, well, this is just a matrix. Where's the text that says like, here are the kinds of actions or kinds of methods that could be used to implement everything that's in this plan? It's kind of already laid out in each section within, how you can help. So I like that structure. I'm just thinking, not telling here, so take this with a grain of salt, but having a column for environmental justice to speak to the statutory requirement, I think is good. I was really impressed with those boxes that you had in each section that said, what did we hear from the community? I don't know that I've seen that in any of the other plans quite done so effectively. So kudos on that. And I wonder if, given what you presented today as like the top 2 or top 3 issues that this region felt were the most important, if those could be columns in the implementation matrix to say, it's not just about environmental justice. These are the top 2 or 3 items that our communities feel we need to address. Which of these action items actually address those, and have another different icon for housing or, the other priorities.
Scott can come up with that, I'm sure.
Just, again, I'm just thinking, I'm not telling you that you don't need to do that. I'm just, thinking out loud a little bit.
Thank you.
This is Alex still, and I'll wrap up. I just wanted to make sure that any observations we had from the site visit, we got in the record, and I know we've done a fair amount of that already. But I just want to do it myself. So with regard to the South Dorset Village Center area, we've talked about how this is a new village center and why, and how much of it is owned by the municipality. I'm not sure it was mentioned that we visited the new town hall or town office that's within that area at the end of a fairly long new access, and that we walked around that a bit to see the connection to the hiking trails that are up the road, and sort of got a feel for what feels like a fairly vast area that the town owns and is considering, facilitating more development. So that was just one observation. It's a civic use there's a commitment that the town has made in that area to that particular property. With regard to the stop we made at the town of Manchester's offices, there was talk about the pedestrian infrastructure that was always present up to that end of the I guess it's the planned growth area, but that the sidewalk had in recent years been upgraded, I think in conjunction with bringing sewer to that side of the planned growth area, and that Gordon Black, is it?
Yeah.
Had mentioned that that sewer connection was now available for the mobile home park or manufactured home community that's next to the town offices to connect, although they hadn't connected yet. Let's see. I don't think I had any additional observations for the rest of Manchester. Janet asked some questions about mapping one side of a river versus another within a village area, within rural general. Nick answered those. I think I wonder from the other board members if we've seen it handled differently in other regions through the use of the transition infill future land use type versus having a rural general butt up against a village area within these river corridor areas, but I just wondered about that. The transition infill future land use category is a little bit of a wild card, and for areas that already have existing development and might be redeveloped at some point within a flood hazard area, it might be more appropriate than a rural general category, but yeah, just a thought.
Thinking out loud.
Yeah, again, thinking, not telling, just thinking out loud. Yeah, and I just want to second Kirsten's observation about the flood hazard areas within some of the planned growth areas in Bennington, in particular, north of the site visit that we made, where we stopped at the state office complex and the flood hazard area was like right there. And we were on the edge of the downtown center, and beyond that, it was planned growth area. There do appear to be some of those flood hazard areas that are not suitable for infill, are unlikely to ever be seed development because they're so far removed from any pre-existing development. And it might make more sense to adjust the mapping in those areas to reflect that, as opposed to having them be planned growth area, which, as Kirsten mentioned, there's a little bit of a statutory problem on that front. Yeah, that's all I had, except I wish we'd gotten to panel, but we just didn't have time.
All right, thank you, Alex. So this is Sarah, and I have a few questions. One of the great things about going last is I don't have to repeat some of my things that have been already said, but I would like to hear a little bit more about why Manchester Center is, or Manchester Village is not a downtown.
Or, you mean the village center in the town of Manchester, Sarah?
Correct.
This
Thank you for the
Janet.
clarification.
Yeah, I can start. This is Samantha. We spoke about this a little bit on the site visit. I think we were just being kind of cautious in hewing to the designation program steps, which I understand are distinct from the FLU categories. But we did go back and forth a bit on this decision, and I think mostly in order to avoid too much confusion, decided to map it as a center because it will in all likelihood be a step 2 center, and this area in Manchester doesn't have some of the components necessary to be a step 3 center under the new designation program. And because that is sort of also known as a downtown, we didn't think that it qualified as a downtown, and so we mapped it in line with the STEP program. But if you have guidance that sort of allows for an, I guess, inconsistency in the mapping and the designation program, or sort of separation more explicitly, we would be open to hearing.
Well, I think, this is Sarah, I think you just articulated some of the differences is in looking at our side of everything in terms of the future land use mapping and the statutory requirements. It seems to function as a downtown and meet the future land use definition of a downtown. And I think a lot of what we've been seeing in a lot of different areas, it sort of pairs up with different areas that are being considered downtowns. There is that sort of step recognition, which is more the community investment board side of things. So that might be something to further clarify with them, but just recognizing, I think we've learned today about the North Shire, the South Shire, and it's interesting that within the whole area, you only have one downtown. And as we look at the future and trying to accommodate housing in the tier 1Bs and potentially tier 1As in the future, that just might be something to consider. Again, just questions more so and learning.
Yeah, and we'll definitely follow up on that, because I think, this is Samantha, I think that there's an interest and an appetite in that. So if we can get some clarity on making sure it won't sow too much confusion and having them sort of acknowledged differently through different programs, then I think there's definitely an interest.
If I could point out, this is Nick, the main thing that is missing here is a downtown organization, and the area has the Manchester Business Association, which is almost kind of like this, but it's not quite. So if that were in a slightly different corporate form, this will be a downtown center any day. But that was really the biggest impediment to mapping that as a downtown. I think we had it as a downtown for almost the entire process until thinking that's not gonna change into a downtown organization by the time we are at this hearing. So, or,
Yeah, and
but
this is Janet. I don't think that the FLU category of downtown is any different than, it's in the same paragraph in statute as village center. They're the same, except that that last sentence of that paragraph says that village centers don't have to have water and sewer. Manchester's downtown, as everybody calls it, has water and sewer. So,
And this is Sarah. I think one of the other things that we've tried to work on distinguishing between the two different sides, between the CIB steps and our side, with the future land use, is the distinguishment that really has been more of a catch for communities is the presence of historic properties, state register, national register properties, which obviously Manchester does have. So, it has no trouble stepping over that threshold that some other areas have had trouble stepping over that threshold. So I appreciate the additional information and look forward to hearing more as you progress into your application in terms of what direction you decide to go in. A couple other quick things, and this comes from trying to, as we go throughout the state, trying to establish equity in terms of how we treat different areas. One of the things that came up was with museums and things of that nature, which have fees to get in and utilize, is how do they fit within downtowns or village centers. And I wanted to note that in North Bennington, the village center expansion includes the Park McCullough area, which does appear to be an admission-based area. So just like to hear a little bit more about why that was included within that village center expansion area and what sort of thoughts went into that.
This is Nick. What we see as the primary draw of the Park McCullough site is the grounds, which are open to the public. And those grounds which are very popular for walking are what we see as the more prominent feature rather than the viewing of the buildings themselves, the using of the building as event venues. It is an extraordinarily popular walking area. And I think that the civic, almost recreational component is what we see as the reason that it would be in, as opposed to one of the alternative categories.
Yeah, and this is Bill. I would just add on that the village school of North Bennington, right across the road, utilizes that property as an extension of its campus. They do conduct all sorts of activities on that.
All right, well, that's helpful information in terms of the grounds are open without a fee.
No fee.
A couple other just sort of consistency things I'd like to know a little bit more about. In Bennington itself, the downtown planned growth area to the east includes the East Road area, and then further beyond that is some transition. And looking at them in terms of mapping, they appear to be very similar. So just curious as to why that East Road area was included in the PGA in that transition.
So that easternmost extent, it has a less intensive zoning treatment. It also is at the ends of utility lines, which would require more substantial investments in already developed areas than the areas slightly to the west that in some cases are undeveloped or already developed with or fully developed with single family homes. But as the topography got steeper in that general area, the town starts to fade into the national forest, and we wanted to make sure that that was reflected, that there is not a ton of growth planned in that neighborhood, in part because of the expense of adding and improving sewer utilities in particular in that general vicinity. Utilities do exist out there, yes, but probably need more improvement than the town that, if it's priming itself for growth, will need to make a lot of investments elsewhere. So acknowledging a little degree of prioritization of growth areas within the area, particularly areas that start to struggle with bike path access. Sidewalks start to become harder to reach, more roundabout. In some cases, sidewalks are fading into the grass where they're just slowly disappearing due to lack of maintenance over time. That was another one of the reasons that you're getting kind of far from the downtown, so walkability is becoming a meaningful concern on the east end.
So this is Sarah. So the area that is included in the PGA is before the sidewalk ends, the Shel Silverstein moment. It's more of that, it's within that area and.
Or it has low traffic streets that lead into the sidewalk network, or areas that are very much prime for development, like empty lands and adjacent to utility rights of way.
Thank you. I had a similar question on the shifting onto the northwest side of the planned growth area for Bennington. And this was along North Bennington Road, south of 279. I think we drove through that area. There's self-storage. It's, and if you just go on the other side of 279, it's transition within that area. So just a question as to that area sort of looks the same also as the transition on the other area. Why include it in the PGA versus have it be transition?
I think, this is Samantha, I think, on the south side of 279, a lot of that was already mapped as part of the growth center boundary. I can't remember off the top of my head. There might be a tiny bit of expansion to where 279 crosses, but it felt like that was still kind of contiguous with how the town has long conceived of its growth center. And then, yes, the transition area that we went through on the other side of 279, where there's grocery store, there's several car dealerships. That just felt, especially because of the separation with the highway, it's even more isolated from the sort of contiguous growth area in downtown in Bennington. And the town does have aspirations to have more pedestrian friendly development. And again, the bike path that we talked about, the so-called ninja path, goes sort of behind those properties and connects. So there are long-term ambitions for it to be more accessible, but just it does feel isolated by that highway separation and sort of the way the town has conceived of those areas.
If I could add, this is Nick. Notably, there is a lack of direct sidewalk access underneath that highway right of way connecting these two places. There are desire lines everywhere, but the North Side Drive corridor has a very notoriously disconnected sidewalk that creates a lot of pedestrian conflict. One of the reasons for this ninja path effort behind all of this was to alleviate the need to do that. And importantly, there are substantial impediments to building such sidewalks because the drainage works on the state highway, that is that road, are non-existent before. So disruption or the complication of building sidewalk along the main street there, that would give you a more direct access from the potential growth area that you're discussing to the downtown, also make it a little bit tenuous. We think that path is going to be awesome. It's a great project, but it's hard to substitute for sidewalks on a main road.
All right, thank you. Just a couple more questions, and these are more around consistency and enterprise areas. So in Arlington, we passed by the Mac molding site, which is south on 313, which is actually a transition area and not an enterprise, although it is a large industrial complex. There are other large industrial complexes in the area that are mapped instead as enterprise. Why was that one transition?
This is Nick. So one of the things that is being explored in that general vicinity, immediately to the north in the village area, is wastewater issues. Because of this site has meaningful redevelopment potential should utilities be brought to the site. A large portion of the back lot where the existing public water system that serves the plant exists, there is very substantial development potential, and that development potential contingent on utilities felt to us as almost definitional to transition. While it is a gigantic plant, the lot itself is so large that and so proximate to the downtown that in a downtown that has few greenfield development sites adjacent to it, not downtown, Village Center, that to recognize those planning efforts, we want to make sure that that was mapped as a transition area to acknowledge its development potential contingent on utilities.
Appreciate it. I only have one more, which is in that mid Pownell Center. The transition area south along Route 7 has a large solar field that's mapped as transition. In other areas, they're mapped as enterprise. Similar question around that.
This is Nick again. That is an area that has been under live discussion as the planning process has moved forward, reflecting the desires of the community to seek value-added uses of that property in a way that is not simply conservation. We did map it as a transition area. Its proximity to two different public utilities, actually 3 different public utilities, gave us a reason to say that should a bunch of work be put into that general vicinity, this is an area that could see some contingent growth. Notably, since the mapping process was completed, that project is moving more in the direction of conservation in the river corridor in particular. But when these maps were being first developed, a lot of that conversation was still very live, and the line between developable areas that are on the edges of the river corridor or outside of the river corridor and the areas that are closer to the river is very much a live debate to this day. We do not know the future of that general vicinity. We do believe that there will be some combination of conservation and non-conservation uses, and the proximity of utilities would be needed to make any non-conservation use viable in that corridor. So again, similar reasoning of utilities are necessary to get any value out of that.
All right, well, thank you so much. We're going to transition. We're running right on time. It's 3:28. We're actually a couple minutes ahead of schedule for questions and comments from state partner agencies and the public. I see that Marcella has joined us online from VTrans. Marcella, do you have any questions or comments that you'd like to provide?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I do not have, oops, sorry. I do not have any questions or comments at this time, but I have been enjoying reviewing the plan and we're going to continue doing that. Thank you. And this has been really helpful.
Thank you. I do not see any other state agency partners online, but please speak up if you are there and perhaps I just am not placing you correctly. And do we have anyone in the room that's incognito from a state agency that might want to say, all right, fantastic. All right, well, I would like to open up to questions and comments from the public, and we do have several people actually physically in attendance here in the room that I would like to go to first that have been patiently waiting on uncomfortable seats. So you get first dibs, and please just raise your hand, identify yourself, and please let us know what your question or comment is. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Eric. So if assuming the approval and everything with the rezoning of your maps, will that mitigate some of the legislation the state puts in place when trying to do developments in certain regions? If you've already determined this is an area where you can develop, does that then mitigate the state's ability to step in and go, wait, we have thoughts on this? Because if that's not the general reason for doing this, then I can't really see why we break everything into predetermined maps of development.
So I'm happy to take that and then turn over to BCRC to try and fill in. So part of this process that was envisioned in Act 181 was to map these future land use areas as sort of a first step. And that once these areas were mapped, they could have additional benefits conveyed. And I think in the draft plan, you have it sort of separated in terms of growth areas specifically, and those are future land use categories that would be eligible for tier 1As and 1Bs. Whether or not to opt into these is up to the actual communities. And I think what you have in the draft BCRC plan is a list of communities that are considering tier 1B. I haven't seen a yet for tier 1A. That would be a separate process later on after the plan is approved and then confirmed by this board at a future time. So the concept is that, yes, that there would be the ability to have as a tier 1B, an exemption for up to 50 units of housing from Act 250.
Is it 50 units and a certain amount of land, or is it 50 units?
It is 50
Janet?
units and a certain amount of land.
10 acres, right?
10, yeah, under 10,
Yes,
Under 10, under 50.
yeah,
Mhm.
or
Correct.
up to 50.
and tier 1A is, it's really a little bit more of a delegation to that municipality because the pre-existing Act 250 permits don't go away. They are there and can be amended through the local permitting process, but through a tier 1A, should a community wish to opt into that, that would be an exemption without a limit in terms of acreage or units.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? And is,
Yes, it does. I'm just making sure that as we go through this process and we bother to, designate this is an area we're allowed to
Yeah.
do it doesn't then allow the state to be like, well, they did designate this, but we've decided because someone called us, there are now different rules that you have to follow because we decided so. If we're going to designate something as a new growth area, under 50 houses, under 10 acres, just an example, it should just be allowed to do that,
So,
in my opinion.
there are all kinds of state permits that will still be required in terms of, depending on whether that particular development triggers the need for it. Stormwater, wetlands permits, various other types of permits may be triggered by a development in these areas. What this process is getting is Act 250 exemptions, specifically.
That was my main
Yeah,
concern
yeah.
specifically. I know the
Okay.
others are still gonna be there for
Yeah.
environmental impact and
Yeah,
runoff and
yeah.
and water movement and
Yeah.
conservation of all that, but
and the idea is that, as particularly with tier 1A, as Sarah said, the municipality is taking on this, right? It's equivalent, it's not duplicative anymore. Municipality has this, basically same standards. And where it doesn't have an existing local standard that addresses an existing Act 250 permit condition, if there were a change on that property, change in development, that old Act 250 permit condition would have to be carried through, if the local municipality didn't have a regulation that addressed it.
so I want to provide a quick footnote and then I'll give it over to BCRC, which is, we have not yet approved a tier 1A because it requires to have an approved and confirmed regional plan. We have not had one of those yet. So hopefully it's sort of like, I feel like this is summer blockbuster time. Coming soon, at the end of July or August, you may see a tier 1A application. The other footnote that I'd like to provide is S325 is on the governor's desk. That does modify some of these requirements. And so we're waiting to see what happens with that. And so all these are sort of the asterisks, subject to change. But feel free to go online and acquaint yourself with what S325 as passed by the legislature is. And hopefully is going to be settled soon so we can speak more succinctly to these.
So it doesn't really change the tier 1A and tier 1B concepts.
It changes some on tier 1, but at any rate, well, BCRC.
Yeah, just if I might, I think this is Bill, again, I think it's important that we draw this distinction between the future. I feel like we're conflating the definitions a little bit. So with regard to the future land use maps, the planned growth areas are a threshold requirement for opting into tier 1B at this point. It does not mean that if something is mapped as a future growth area in the regional map, that automatically would lead to those exemptions down the road. It also with regard to the regional future land use mappings does not supersede the municipal plan mapping or zoning requirements in those towns. So there's a lot of kind of things coming together here, where the true exemptions will exist are within those planned growth areas for the communities that have opted into the Tier 1B status.
All right, I want to make sure that we get to everybody around.
So Eric, could I get your last name?
Burge, BURDGE.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anybody else in the room that has a question? Okay. Is there anybody online that has a question? If so, please raise your hand, or if you can't raise your hand, come off mic and speak. I'm going to give a couple seconds because I know sometimes that can take a few minutes to navigate.
This is Annette. I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Annette. And we do have two other people from the public that are online, Zachary and Rachel. Is there anything that you wish to say or questions that you may have? All right, I hear nothing else. I'll return and say, does anybody else wish to have more questions in the room?
Last takes from the BCRC staff.
Thank you all for coming to Bennington County. We know.
Let's hear it for our excellent driver, Linda Benway.
And thank you all. It's been a pleasure to learn more about your communities in your areas. And I think just in terms of next steps, what I'd like to sort of put out is, so the public comment period does close. While we have in the past entertained extensions to that, where people have requested that, we have not had any requests. And we've been trying to schedule these visits earlier in the process to try and make sure that people have time after these to still consider their comments. As I repeated at the beginning of it, those comments, there is a form that people can use, or they can simply just email act250.board@vermont.gov. Once we have that, we will then move to creating a response. At future meetings of ours, usually typically on Mondays, we will be discussing our response. I am the board lead on this, so I'll be preparing that, taking everything, assimilating it, and then hopefully we will get those comments as soon as possible after the close to you. We have received quite a few applications in, and we're going to try and balance everything as best as possible. The other thing that I would like to say is this is a pre-application response. A lot of our responses termed in terms of more information that we'd like to provide. What we have offered to other RPCs before the application is after the response to come in to one of our public meetings with questions as you work towards your application. So hopefully this is a collaborative process that we can be accessible and answer questions. So yes, Janet.
Can I just add that for those who are online and in the room are going to listen to this recording, that our database has all of the materials related to this application. Any comments that we receive from partner agencies or any other interested entities, they will all be on the database that you can access from our website. If you look at the website, go to
the website is act250.vermont.gov.
Yes. And the Act 181
tab,
pull down menu, go to regional plan application, and you will find information there about how to find access to the database. Actually, it needs to be updated because the information about how to access the database is really not relevant, but the database link is there. And if you click on search, all of the materials will come up for each application. Look for the Bennington County Regional Plan application, click on that, and all the materials and exhibits for that application will populate the screen.
Very good. Anything else before we close meeting? I take a motion to close that.
Move to close.
All right, Kirsten,
I'll second that.
Janet, second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you so much for coming, and we will end the meeting. Yes.